Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to call our regular council meeting for Monday, June 8th, 2020 to order at 6 p.m. Welcome to members of the public who are joining us live by webcast this evening, or if you're turning into the video that we post on the website after the meeting. I want to, as we're conducting our meeting both in the chamber and electronically, I'd like just to mention that we have to my left Councillor Rintoul and to my right Councillor Garnett. Joining us by video conference are Councillors Duncan, Councillor Fallett, Councillor O'Keefe, and Councillor Wainwright. And want to also welcome staff in attendance this evening for the public's benefit. Our video isn't on the staff that are in the chamber or those councils attending electronically, but we have CAO Mr. Humble in attendance, Corporate Officer Ms. Nelson, our Chief Financial Officer Mr. Hissick, Director of Engineering, Works and Parks Ms. Clary, our EOC Director, Fire Chief Mr. Mickelson, along with our Senior Manager of Current Planning, and also currently our EOC Recovery Director, Ms. Verhagen, and our Senior Manager of Long Range Planning, Mr. Newcomb. And he just left the room, but I want to thank our IT guru, Mr. Maxwell, for keeping us all connected for these meetings and for the public. Now I'd like to provide a territorial acknowledgement that we are holding this evening's meeting in the traditional ancestral territory of the Wasanich First Nations. And turning to the agenda, just before we seek approval, there's just two small changes, and that is Councillor Rintoul has requested that item 16.6 under correspondence for information, which is the 2019 annual report from CREST, we raise that to regular correspondence, and I'll make that recommend we make that item agenda item 14A. And Councillor Fallett has requested an additional, or to make a council report under councilor's report under item 11.
Move approval as amended.
Second.
Councillor O'Keefe.
No, and also in terms of the agenda, I was going to have a second item, as we discussed in my report, under so they'll have referral to EAC and then a report on accessibility issues.
Yes, thank you for that reminder, Councillor O'Keefe. So if that's a friendly with the mover and seconder, thank you. All those in favor? And thank you. And next we usually move to public participation, as I think members of the public are now aware, pursuant to the COVID pandemic and subsequent provincial ministerial orders, our council meetings remain closed to the public until further notice. And really, the challenge for us here in Sydney is the size of our council chamber, and we're limited. We cannot provide proper physical distancing for all council members to attend in person, or all staff members to attend in person, and it would be very challenging to, we would have very, very small numbers of the public we would be able to admit. But we have had procedures in place for several weeks now, where members of the public can participate in public participation by correspondence, by sending an email to our corporate administrator at admin.ca, or admin@sydney.ca prior to noon on the day of a meeting, or electronically, and also contacting the corporate officer to be able to enter the meeting via Zoom. We have had participants in previous meetings, both under email correspondence and electronically, but no one has requested to participate this evening. So having none, we'll move on to presentations, and I'll look to our EOC Director, Fire Chief Mr. Mickelson, to present. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Council, members of the public watching the live webcast. Staffing in our EOC currently consists of 8 to 10 staff, with some only partially allocated to EOC tasks and others continue to work remotely. Operationally, we continue to support the following. In consultation with the BC Trucking Association, we have closed our critical supply rest stop and reopened the lot for use by the Mary Winspear Centre and for the use by the public. Our shower facilities for unsheltered persons facilitating personal hygiene continues at our Iroquois Park facility. Use of this facility has remained strong, but over time we have seen the use by unsheltered persons decline and be replaced by persons arriving in vehicles and recreational vehicles, which was not the intent. Our plan is to close the shower facilities on or before July 1st. This closure will be well communicated prior via signage and by the security and cleaning staff on site. As the policy group, I encourage your input on this, and we can revisit it at the June 22nd council meeting prior to a final decision being made. Unsheltered persons will continue to have access to the public washrooms at Iroquois Park, Tallista Park, and 4th Street, all of which will continue to be sanitized daily. Wellness checks for unsheltered persons continue daily in conjunction with enforcement of our no camping bylaw in parks and public spaces. This is a task that we anticipate will be required for at least the remainder of the summer months. Our business liaison support program continues with over 175 visits to date, providing guidance, advice, and physical distancing floor decals to Town of Sydney businesses. Today, we reopened our Tallista and Iroquois and other park facilities. I must emphasize the importance that if you are sick, please stay at home and do not use these communal amenities. Out of an abundance of caution, the Tallista Picnic Shelter, the Water Spray Park, and the Community Wellness Park adjacent to the library will remain closed for the time being. Also today, Town Hall reopened on a limited basis for property tax payments only. We continue to strongly encourage all inquiries and payments to be made online. Considerable work has been done creating and implementing safe return to work plans for Town Hall staff in conjunction with physical barriers installed at finance, administration, development services, driver services, and the community safety building. On May 29th, 3 parking spaces were repurposed as expanded sidewalk space in front of and adjacent to the Sydney Bakery. This location in particular was observed as difficult for patrons and persons using the sidewalk to maintain adequate physical distancing. Later in the agenda, an amendment to our off-street parking and loading bylaw will be debated to permit additional uses such as outdoor seating and parking spaces. Other pinch point locations in which physical distancing is difficult to maintain and repurposing of parking spaces is not feasible have been identified with signage. This signage requests pedestrians yield to persons using mobility aids. EO staff participate daily in numerous conference calls and Zoom meetings with other local governments, the CRD, and provincial ministries including Health, Emergency Management BC, the ministry responsible for poverty reduction, and BC Housing. Efforts to coordinate actions taken, such as reopening of services and recreational facilities, are made, but are not always possible. Support for our extended care and nursing homes continue. I can report all are doing well, and this is directly attributable to the dedication of their staff and proactive investment into emergency and business continuity planning. A survey of Sydney businesses conducted by EOC staff is complete. We are still reviewing the data to identify themes and trends from the qualitative comments provided by each participant. I can, however, provide Council with an initial overview of our findings. 700 of Sydney's 981 licensed businesses were contacted by phone, and over 320 surveys were completed. Businesses from all sectors were surveyed. The proportionality of surveys conducted per sector was a key consideration. For example, the percentage of retail businesses surveyed or surveys conducted is similar to the percentage of licensed retail businesses in Sydney. 79% of businesses surveyed stated that they had been negatively affected by COVID-19. 5.5% stated they had been positively affected, and 15.5% noted no change. 65% of the businesses surveyed stated they had accessed federal or provincial funding assistance. And of the 79% of businesses who stated they had been negatively affected, 52% advised they had laid off staff. Detailed survey findings will be provided in a future report to Council. Our overarching EOC objectives remain the reduction of human suffering, reduction of economic loss, enhancement of community culture, and enhancing our community's sustainability against future disaster events. Smart Risk Control has been re-engaged to assist the town with enhancement of our community's sustainability, which includes a possible second wave of COVID-19 in the fall. The scope of this work is to establish a neighborhood disaster resiliency program. This initiative will be started in conjunction with our Neighborhood Emergency Preparedness Program volunteers, the Town of Sydney Emergency Program Assistant, and our GIS technician. Our goal is to identify geographical neighborhood locations, identify groups, volunteers, and team leaders, and provide them with training and materials. Each neighborhood, or pod, will be tracked using Esri GIS mapping software. Numbers of volunteers, those with specialist skills, locations of supplies, training required and completed, and individual pod needs will be monitored and tracked. Facilitating and supporting community-based disaster resiliency is, without question, the most effective way to prepare for and mitigate the effects of a future disaster event. While this initiative is being implemented during COVID-19, it is by no means COVID-specific and is intended to continue and be supported indefinitely. In closing, I would like to thank and acknowledge the patience and diligence of our residents and business owners and for demonstrating and adapting to overcoming the challenges of the past 3 months. I'd be happy to answer any questions at this time.
Thank you very much. I'll open it to Council if there are any questions for Mr. Mickelson. Councillor O'Keefe, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Mickelson, for the report. As you know, I had forwarded a question about the survey, and I thank Ms. Verhagen for her response on that. And what I was looking for was that we made a point of reaching out to persons with disabilities through the survey. I'll be talking a bit more about persons with disabilities and accessibility later in the report, but last week was Accessibility Week, and you know, I was reminded again about how the needs of those people that have those issues are often forgotten. And so I was hoping that we might be able to make some adjustments to the survey in order to capture what some of their needs might be. And I'm wondering, is that a possibility, or has the survey already been finalized?
Through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, no, the survey has not been finalized. We can look at adding some additional questions there. We need to be careful with how we would meet the needs that are identified and make sure that we can either advocate for those needs to other groups or coordinate meeting those needs using some community resource partners and how we might best help people with the information that we gather there.
Okay, so our concern is, I guess, if we're not going to be able to provide assistance, that might we might lead people to have expectations. Is that sort of the point there?
That's right. We want to set up expectations for help that we can't provide, but if we can connect people with resources that can help them, then that would be a benefit. Yeah,
well, I would like to advocate for having a question or two on that. I know that there was some reference that perhaps there was a question there about people identifying if they have a medical issue. But having a medical issue and then having some sort of physical or other disability is not necessarily the same. So that's something that I would like to see incorporated. I'll leave other maybe members of council if they have any comments to make on that as well. But thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor. I might just, for the public's benefit, Ms. Verhagen, if you might just want to speak to, Councillor O'Keefe's question was with regards to the resident survey. So Mr. Mickelson just reported out on the business survey, which is just completed. Ms. Verhagen, could you comment on the resident survey for a moment?
Sure. Through all of council, we are completing the resident survey and we'll be sending out a link to that soon for all residents to complete. We're looking for information from people on how they're doing through the pandemic so far and what needs they may have. There are some specific questions in there about their experiences so far. And then when we get the results of that, we'll be using those to formulate our next actions to help the community. The project that Mr. Mickelson mentioned about the neighborhood resilience project, we are hoping to really connect people better in the neighborhoods through that project as well. So we will be posting the link for that survey. It will be an online survey that people can complete online. So that should be going out soon.
Thank you. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And through the mayor to Chief Mickelson, if I may. Chief, with respect to the business survey, and either for your comment or if Ms. Verhagen wants to add, we see a number of initiatives in the package this evening geared towards food service sector, be it cafes or restaurants, which obviously predate to some extent the survey findings. Can we anticipate, given your comment that the number of retailers were sort of well representative of the community, that there may be some initiatives coming forward based on the data you received to help support retailers with some town initiatives as well?
I will defer to Ms. Verhagen on that, I think.
Sure. Through the mayor to Councillor Rintoul. Yes, as we go through the survey results and those qualitative comments that people gave in their survey, there were a number of businesses that requested support in expanding their operations outdoors, and those were not all food service businesses. It was a real mix of businesses that were looking for help with that, everywhere from professional services, offices, childcare, retail, a real mix. So when we summarize those survey results in a report to council at a future meeting, we might propose some more actions to do with that. We may hear from individual businesses as well. Council may receive letters.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to Chief Mickelson. I wanted to follow up on your comments about repurposing of public space, the parking spaces that are on the south side of Beacon Avenue, east of 2nd. And also, you mentioned that you'd identified pinch points for pedestrian traffic that couldn't be addressed by repurposing public space, and you'd put up appropriate signage for that. What I'm, I guess, understanding and asking you to, from your comments and asking you to confirm is, has the EOC finished identifying the pedestrian challenges that can be solved by repurposing some parking spaces, and you're not expecting to bring forward any additional measures of that nature to address pedestrian pinch points?
Through the mayor to Councillor Wainwright, I would say that's going to be something that will continue to be evaluated over time. At this point, we haven't identified any areas, but I wouldn't want to say with absolute certainty that hopefully as traffic increases and if a situation arose where we thought it made sense, obviously in consultation with engineering, we would look at that. But at this point, we don't have any other areas identified.
Okay, thank you for that. And the reason I asked that question was that, and obviously we have it on our agenda for later on, but we've had various correspondence from residents about encouraging us to close a lane to traffic, close a street to traffic, allow businesses to use public space. The bylaw amendments that are proposed tonight would allow businesses to initiate that themselves by applying to expand their space. But that still kind of leaves on the table, does the town want to initiate any additional repurposing of public space? And I think that's a conversation that council is going to have. And that is something we could certainly benefit from the responses in the business survey, but also I'm not sure whether the resident survey is going to be asking some questions about resident views on that topic. And I guess that's a question through you, Mr. Mayor, to staff.
Through the mayor to Councillor Wainwright, no, at this point in time, the resident survey doesn't have any questions about people's views on closing streets in the downtown or in neighborhoods. We could add that if council would like to have specific feedback about that.
I guess that's a discussion we could have later on the during the agenda. It could come up under the councillor's report, but certainly if we're going to have some discussion about something like that, I imagine council would want to know what our residents are thinking rather than make a decision without that kind of input.
Thank you, Councillor. Was there any other further questions for Mr. Mickelson? Seeing none, thank you, Chief, very much for the detailed report. And on behalf of Council, we certainly want to express again our appreciation for the work that all members of the EOC are doing, particularly as they are doing double duty. They still have their regular fire rescue responsibilities in terms of the volunteer and career firefighters, and the other town staff that are involved as well are continuing with the regular operations of the town. So that's greatly appreciated, and I hope you appreciate that. What must be hundreds, if not thousands, of hearts that are in windows across our community are for first responders, including yourself and those that are on the front line. So it's greatly appreciated. Now turn to our bylaws, agenda item 5A, bylaws, and we have bylaw number 2197, off-street parking and loading, amendment number 3. So we initiated this discussion at a previous council meeting and passed a motion for staff to bring forward, and we are now considering that this evening with a recommendation.
I'll move introduction and first reading of bylaw 2197.
Second.
All those in favor? Motion carries unanimous.
A second.
Second.
Discussion? Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm fine with this proceeding. The only thing that I want to ensure is that no spaces that are designated for disabled parking would be eligible to be displaced. So a question through you to staff is that already in their minds? How will that be managed? And do we need to state that specifically in the amendment?
Through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, yes, staff have thought about that. I think by doing this, we would require to see a plan from an applicant showing which parking spaces they intend to use for outdoor seating. If council wants to make it explicitly clear, then we could put that wording right into the bylaw and amend the wording of the draft bylaw. I'm going to switch screens here to look at it. So right now, the new section going into the bylaw would read a maximum of 50% of required parking spaces for a restaurant, then in brackets class 1 or class 2, closing brackets, uses may be used for outdoor seating area for patrons of the associated businesses. So we could modify that to say a maximum of 50% of required parking spaces, not including accessible or not included designated accessible spaces, something like that, if council wanted to consider that.
Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. While I think the intent is something I could support, I think we should be cautious about being too prescriptive, because in some cases it might make sense for them to move a disabled place so that they could have a contiguous outdoor serving area, and there may in fact be no issue with them with doing that is relocating one. But if we actually put some wording in the bylaw that says you can't, then it is a barrier and they can't. So I would rather leave the flexibility and allow staff to evaluate that than be prescriptive in the bylaw and say you can't touch any of the accessible parking spaces.
I would support that, Councillor Wainwright, and suggest that is it enough for staff that council's intention is that there is no loss, and so that if, in the event that a current space was being considered, that it would be made up elsewhere. Okay, I'll turn to Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate that staff would probably review that when they were going over a plan. I like the idea of having it explicit in the bylaw, simply that it means that businesses that were looking at it would, not be surprised by getting that feedback. So having something in there that was explicit, I guess to the effect that the mayor just said, which was something like a maximum of 50% of required parking spaces, not to reduce the overall number of accessible spaces available. So that if it was possible to, because of the redesign of the outside, to have an accessible space that was still actually accessible, because they had changed the configuration. I'm assuming that most of the accessible spaces that are there, those were the ones that are closest, and they couldn't necessarily just substitute one, but given the opportunity to do so, that wouldn't restrict them from being able to substitute one if they could.
Okay, I heard language there that sounded almost like an amendment. Would you like to, Ms. Verhagen referred to a particular clause in the bylaw. Councillor Duncan, would you consider an amendment, or?
Yeah, I will propose that amendment. That it would say a maximum of 50% of required parking spaces per restaurant, Class 1 or Class 2. Uses may be used for outdoor seating area for patrons of the associated business without reducing the overall availability of accessible spaces.
Okay, so the additional clause is without the loss. Is that correct?
Yeah, without loss of accessible spaces.
Okay.
Overall accessible spaces.
And I would second that.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll discussion on the amendment, and so that's a new speaking order. I see Councillor Fallett speaking on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think this is a very important discussion because I've heard time and again from people with accessibility concerns that there are few accessible parking spots, and also in some cases they require more than just a wider spot because of their removing their scooter or mobility aid, and they need a little bit of extra space. So I think while we're in the effort to helping one part of our community, such as the restaurants, by expanding their outdoor eating space, we can't then hamper another section of our community. So when we shift these parking spots, and I think it's a great idea, I'm supportive of this, but I want to ensure that when we're doing so, we're not making it more difficult for that segment of our community that requires good access to good accessible parking spots. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? And that amendment carries unanimous. Thank you. And now turning to further discussion at second reading on the overall bylaw changes. Seeing none, I'll call the question on second reading. All those in favor? The motion carries unanimous.
I'll move third reading.
Second.
All those in favor? Motion carries.
And I'll move adoption of bylaw 2197.
Second.
Thank you. And I'll call the question. All in favor? And the motion carries unanimous again. Thank you. So we'll now turn to the second bylaw amendment to be considered.
I beg your pardon, Mr. Mayor.
Sir.
One other item, if I may, to put
Certainly.
forward, I'll move that staff be directed to bring bylaw number 2197 back to council for consideration of rescinding the bylaw no later than 6 months after the date of adoption.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you, Councillor Rintoul.
Mr. Mayor, as well, I'd like to move that the correspondence be received on that item.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder?
Second.
Discussion? It was a letter,
Oh, sorry, no, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
No, good.
No, we did have a letter that wasn't specifically addressed to that particular agenda item, but does speak to the topic of downtown and use of parking and street space, and we thought it would be relevant to include that at that time, and we do have another letter on the next item as well. Okay, so we'll move to item 5A2, which is bylaw number 2198, the sidewalk cafe regulations and licensing, amendment number 1. And again, had discussion and requested staff bring forward amendments which we're considering this evening from a report dated June 2nd.
I'll move the recommendation, first of all, that the correspondence be received.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you.
Move that bylaw 2198 be introduced and considered for first reading.
Second.
All those in favor? Motion carries.
And move for second reading.
Second.
And discussion on Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. So thinking about accessibility issues again, I'm just not necessarily wanting to make an amendment, but I presume that staff would be attentive to the sign placement on sidewalks. The bylaw talks about cafe or restaurant owners possibly having to put up signage to tell people to let others pass if there's a narrow part there. So I'm just concerned about proliferation of sidewalk signs posing an obstacle to people. So I'll just pass that along for information.
Okay, thank you for those comments, Councillor. Any further discussion? Councillor Follett.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Yes, Councillor O'Keefe and I seem to be on the same bandwidth here on regarding accessibility, because I had made notes regarding the access. And I know that in the past, people with mobility aids have, shall I say, complained because when the sidewalks have got sandwich boards on them, even when they are within the right spot, and with the planter boxes and other people milling about, that the space becomes constrained. And so I think this is probably a really good indication that we need to start looking at having a committee, an advisory committee on accessibility, because I think we need some clear direction in our town, what the needs are for those with mobility concerns and challenges, so that when we come into a situation like this, we already know the parameters. And I'm not suggesting that staff isn't doing a good job, but I think there's more. We need to talk to those people who are actually using the pedestrian ways and how obstacles, because this will become an obstacle for them, how this impacts them and what we can do about it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett, then Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sort of as an aside, but to the topic, I don't want to steal the thunder or words of Dr. Bonnie Henry, but I think when it comes to the pinch points and traversing and getting across the sidewalks and lining up with people, I think we need to be patient and kind, and we just need to take turns and just try not to be in as much of a rush as life normally takes us on. And, you know, we can all help each other by just letting somebody else go first, and it makes the thing work a lot better. So it's just sort of a thought out to the public, just to, you know, be kind and respectful to each other, and this will work a lot better. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. As we've been talking about this, and I'm looking through, I have a comment here. Unobstructed pedestrian walkway. We were talking about having a requirement that they need to have that 3 meter space, which, you know, is an attempt to make sure that people can pass with both the physical distancing and maneuverability, as Councillor Follett is talking about. And I'm wondering, though, if in some of the places, because we've also further down in the report highlighted the problem that because they might have to expand. If we're having roadside cafes, we won't have platforms, and there will be a step down. We won't have accessible seating. And so I'm wondering if there's a way we can reduce that walkway to have one way that's only maybe 1.5 meter wide going around things, so that we can move more things, as long as they can have either one way that's 1.5 each way, or two way that's 3 meters, that it meets that. Or is it always got to be 3 meters because of accessibility issues as well?
I'll turn to staff.
To count. Sorry, go ahead, Allison.
No, go ahead, Jen. Thank you.
Just about the space requirement, we believed that would allow 2 people to walk side by side, or pass each other on the sidewalk, the 3 meters. And the current sidewalk cafes only require the chairs to be 0.6 meters away from the curb in a parked car lane. So that doesn't actually allow too much space to go around on the outside. You can't see my hand gestures here, but around on the outside of the sidewalk cafe. So there might be certain situations where that might work, but there are lots of areas in Sydney where it wouldn't work to split the 2 pedestrian lanes to go around the sidewalk cafe, if that's what you're asking.
Yes. And I can see your hand gestures, actually. Well, I'm wondering if we're talking about having roadside cafes and being able to allocate parking spaces to cafe spaces, if we can have somewhat of a hybrid where we're having walking space that's allocated to parking spaces as well, if that would help in some of those locations. And I'm also wondering about, it looks like the phrasing is that a sidewalk cafe or a roadside cafe. And I'm wondering if there's a possibility, if you would apply for, if this is an and or situation, like would you have to apply for a special license for roadside and sidewalk? If, for example, you wanted to put you had enough room to put 2 tables next to your roadside cafe up on your sidewalk to have those as accessible tables, and then inaccessible tables down at the roadside cafe, would that be a possibility to apply for both?
Through mayor to councilors? No, the bylaw, I guess, doesn't say that you can't apply for both, so you would be able to apply for both if you would like. And sorry, further to your previous question, yes, we could actually do the barricade so the walking path is around. So the sidewalk cafe is in the normal spot, and then the walking path is around if there's barricades around for a walkway.
Okay. Would that require an additional permit, or would that be something that would be kind of a condition of a permit for, say, a sidewalk cafe that you would just put in there, or would they have to apply for an additional permit to use that road space for the parking as well?
So I guess that could be identified as a pinch point technically with the EOC. So we would work, if that was how we wanted to move forward, we would, engineering and the EOC could work together to look at some of those applications that come forward. At this point, we don't really know how many businesses might want something like this, so we could kind of, we could see the demand and go from there.
Just for clarification, so to the question, Councillor Duncan's question, so when we're talking about the 3 meters and whether it's separated or not, we're talking about public right-of-way for pedestrian use. So if we were going to incorporate that with parking cafe, it would that portion of it would be public right-of-way. It wouldn't be part of the license application. Would that be correct? I mean, so I guess what I'm getting at is somebody could apply to use sidewalk that they're not using or parking space that they're not currently using, but we might want to reconfigure the public right-of-way. That wouldn't be part of the application. That would be part of the EOC determining. Right. So I understand. I think I understand what you're saying, but I'm just seeking clarification if that's what you're meaning, Councillor Duncan.
if I can, Mr. Mayor, I think you're correct. I think it would be at the discretion of the EOC to look at that particular scenario.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I had one final, it's a comment less than a question, or I guess a comment that might spark more comments from my colleagues. In the last paragraph under the section roadside cafes, there's a comment that council may choose a total number of allowable parking spaces that could be converted into roadside cafes if they would like to set a limit at this time. And so we don't really have much of, I don't know if we need to make a motion. Well, I'll put it out for discussion that perhaps 40% or sorry, 60% of spaces must remain, or say 40% can be taken, whichever way you want to phrase it. It was a nice justifiable number based on our target of only being able to open up our contacts to 60%. So presumably we don't want to encourage more than 60% of the people who'd normally come to downtown to be there.
Sorry, is that a suggested amendment, Councillor?
It's not a suggested amendment at this time.
Okay.
It was simply what popped into my head, and I could see Councillor Wainwright raising his hand as it was meant to be this discussion for the rest of my colleagues about whether they had an appetite to discuss that at this time, and if so, then I might make an amendment based on what they felt about it.
No, thank you for raising it, as it was mentioned in the report. Councillor Wainwright and Councillor O'Keefe.
So I think it does, in principle, I could support a limit on the number of parking spaces that could be converted, but I guess I'm assuming that, and this actually is something maybe staff could clarify as well, but my expectation is that they can't apply for parking spaces that are not adjacent to their own business. So you can't ask if you're 20% of the street frontage on a particular block, you're not going to be able to apply for 100% of the parking spaces on that block. Is that correct? Or could somebody apply and staff would look at it and probably recommend no? How would that work?
Through mayor to councillor. So the way the current bylaw works is if a business would like a sidewalk cafe to expand into their neighboring business, they would have to get approval from their neighboring business to do so. So we would follow that same principle with the roadside cafes.
Okay. So somebody potentially could ask for a roadside cafe the entire length of a block, but they'd have to get support from every other business fronting onto that on that block.
Theoretically, and also if they were to want to block off an entire block, there was already the motion to come back to council if that was something that staff was looking at moving forward with.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. Yeah, my thinking was similar to Councillor Wainwright. I'm just wondering if we did say no more than 50% of parking spaces, are we talking about 50% of parking spaces in the whole downtown area, or 50% of spaces on Beacon? Yeah, and I'm not sure how that, I guess logistically, wondering how that would work.
Thank you, Councillor. I have a comment, and that is I'm a little reluctant to set a percentage. I mean, again, Councillor O'Keefe is raised, what parking spaces are we referring to, but I think without knowing, the number of parking spaces that are ascertaining the area we're speaking of specifically, and knowing the parking spaces, I think setting a percentage is pretty arbitrary. We're going to be seeing, or I think staff are going to be seeing applications one at a time, and I think, as is indicated in the bylaw, it's on a first-come, first-served basis. And I think if there was multiple requests within a block, we're going to be considering the first request first and proceeding accordingly. So I just have some hesitancy in terms of choosing a particular percentage. Any further discussion at second reading? I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you.
I'll move third reading.
Second.
All those in favor? Motion carries.
I'll move adoption of bylaw number 2198.
Second.
All those in favor? That also carries unanimous, and we have one, number 6.
I'll move the staff be directed to bring bylaw number 218 back to council for consideration of rescinding the bylaw no later than 6 months after the date of adoption.
Second.
All those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. We'll now turn to item 6, which is adoption of our minutes of our regular council meeting of May 25th, 2020.
I'll move adoption.
Second.
Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. We have no business not completed at a previous meeting. We do have business arising from the minutes of our council in-camera meeting of May 25th, 2020. And we have a number of citizen appointments to announce to two organizations. The first is Council's resolution that Michael Williams be appointed to the Saanich Peninsula Water and Wastewater Commission to the end of December 2020. And the second is with regards to both citizen and councillor appointments to the Beacon Wharf Select Committee. And our resolution is that resident Scott Dallimore and resident Rob Milne be appointed to the Beacon Wharf Select Committee, and that Councillor Duncan and Councillor Wainwright be appointed to the Beacon Wharf Select Committee. And so that's for information. We want to thank all the applicants for their interest, and we look forward to starting the Beacon Wharf Select Committee in the coming weeks. Council and the public will remember that in our discussions earlier this year, we're looking for this committee to bring back its recommendations to council with staff's input before the end of 2020. I'll now move to the mayor's report. I just have one item this evening, and that is I attended the monthly meeting of the South Island Prosperity Partnership Rising Task Force Economic Recovery Committee meeting. And it was a positive meeting. The committee structure has been set. The committees are active. And it's my intention to put a brief presentation together to submit to council at the next meeting. As a representative of the three peninsula municipalities on the task force, I received an invitation last week by resolution from Central Saanich to provide a brief presentation to their council at a meeting in the last half of June, and I'm going to offer to do the same to North Saanich, and I would like to provide our council and my colleagues with that prior to going to those our colleagues in other communities to give that presentation. We now have a number of councillor reports, and I'll start with item 11A, which is Councillor Wainwright, and you had 2 items this evening. Councillor, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I had 2 topics specifically that I wanted to touch on, but I'd like to begin this with some context, and in fact, I think that the discussion I want to have is probably a little bit broader than just those 2 topics. So the situation we find ourselves in with the pandemic has been a rapidly changing situation, so that a week goes by and there's new guidelines, there's new rules, something different is happening, and it's things you were thinking 2 weeks ago are now different, and that is just the way things are going. And it's been very challenging for staff and I know they've been working extremely hard. And as has previously been mentioned, we really appreciate what they've been doing. So one of the challenges in this rapidly evolving situation is council has a role of providing policy input on certain things, and at the same time, the EOC needs to deal with operations and a variety of issues in a timely way that don't need policy input or need policy input quickly. So the mayor and acting mayor have been liaising with the EOC on a regular basis, getting that kind of getting briefed by the EOC on things that are going on, emerging policy issues, and having to keep the rest of council, the policy group, in the loop and make sure that if a matter requires policy direction, that it happens in an appropriate way. And we've been adapting to this kind of new way of doing things over the last several weeks. And I appreciate the mayor's efforts in keeping all of us in the loop and trying to get this new sort of process working smoothly for us. So that is kind of the background for the topics that I wanted to raise tonight. So a few weeks back, when council was considering property tax relief for commercial properties, we were having a fairly broad discussion about the merits of doing that, our different options for doing that. At the time, there was some discussion about saving some money for stimulus measures. There was also some discussion about we would undoubtedly not have all of our capital projects go as planned. We would be looking at making adjustments down the road, and that one of the rationales for being so aggressive with the commercial property tax reduction was that we would likely have the opportunity to save money later that we could direct to additional measures if we chose to. So that sort of sets us up with, we have a couple of topics that we were planning to follow up on at later. Subsequent to that, like 2 weeks later, we had a briefing, our COVID-19 update, and we were discussing the approach to recovery planning. And in that, the question was raised about ensuring that the recovery activities were contributing to some of our long-range priorities, as well as sort of the immediate recovery issues. And the phrase "Build Back Better" came up, and I was left with the understanding, and I think anyone who listened to the debate that night was probably left with the understanding that Build Back Better was actually expected to be a component of the recovery planning. But at our council meeting, our last council meeting, where we had an update on the recovery planning, it was mentioned that there was no expectation at the time of the recovery planning requiring additional financial resources. And that suggested that the recovery plan, as it was envisioned at the time, would not have any capital projects in it or significant expenditures such as stimulus measures. And that gets, gets back to these topics that I think council needs to discuss. The mayor has been briefing the rest of council, the policy group, on a regular basis now. And the thing is, those are not formal council meetings. We don't make motions. We're not taking minutes. It's just a briefing and an opportunity to ask questions, whatever. And in fact, we shouldn't be making decisions in a format like that, because as elected officials, we're supposed to be open and transparent, and people should have an understanding of why we're making any decision that we make, and we should be trying to do it in an open council meeting. So that causes some challenges about doing things in a timely way. If we feel there is a need for a policy discussion and it is something that's time sensitive, we've got to have a special council meeting or arrange to do it in that kind of way. And in fact, we did have a special council meeting to discuss policy input to the EOC. So that's a fairly rambling preamble, but it's actually three things that I suggest that council should have some discussion about. And I know that we have in fact touched on this in some of our briefings, but it is important for us to do it in an open and transparent way. So one of them is this question about Build Back Better during the recovery activities. And specifically, the question could be posed: should we be actually making some streetscape improvements, like expanding sidewalk, to address some of the pinch point type issues we're seeing, rather than the kind of temporary thing? Should we actually try to make things permanent? And I appreciate it. It's not that I'm advocating that specifically that we should do a project of that nature. The point really I'm raising is that if we don't have the discussion about it, then by default, we've decided not to do it. The topic certainly has come up, and there was a bit of an expectation from some of the earlier discussion we've had that we would explore that kind of topic. So we haven't done so, and I would encourage council to actually have that discussion. And that particular type of discussion, in my view, needs to be informed by staff. I know that some capital projects are already underway. I also know that expanding a sidewalk on Beacon Avenue is not necessarily a simple thing. There's a variety of infrastructure in the ground and trees and a bunch of detailed design work that would need to be done before you could even contemplate doing that. And there's the question about capacity to get that done, because that's separate from the capacity to actually build it. And then, of course, there's the funding side of it, too. So I don't see us in a position to actually have that discussion tonight, because we don't have that kind of staff input. But I guess my suggestion to my colleagues is that we should have that discussion in the future, and that we should schedule that and ask staff to provide us the background information that we would need to have that discussion. And Mr. Mayor, it may be appropriate for me to just pause at this point and allow that discussion to happen before I try to move on to talk about stimulus funding or any further point?
Thank you, Councillor Wainwright. I'll turn to colleagues if you wish to comment or ask questions of Councillor Wainwright. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And so, yes, I would concur that it would be very sensible to be in a position to have some detailed discussion around Build Back Better, not least of which for the reason certainly that our Member of Parliament brought to our attention when she spoke to Council, and that is that it would be appropriate to have projects of suitable nature for perhaps federal funding. I recognize that Councillor Wainwright's comments aren't limited to initiatives such as that, but certainly from my perspective, I would like to hear from staff at the appropriate time what projects we have that are ready that might well be suited for Build Back Better and for participation in federal grant initiatives. So I'll leave my comments there, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I agree that it's a good discussion to have. I would like to have the list of capital projects that we're thinking about, those that staff think are shovel ready for stimulus fundings that may come our way, grants and that sort of thing. I didn't see us necessarily doing anything completely new, but more reprioritization perhaps of things that we've already discussed, unless somebody has a brilliant idea that I haven't heard yet. But so, for example, in terms of the pandemic, one of the things that we saw was an increase in people using bikes and sidewalks. And, Councillor Fallett brought this up several council meetings ago about the need to maybe look at fast tracking our active transportation plans. So, that might be something, for example, that I might want to look at. I'd also like to get an idea in terms of what are some of the pressures on our business community? What sectors have been impacted more than others? And I'd like to hear from the EAC as well in terms of any thoughts that they have on these sorts of things. So thank you for that discussion.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor Duncan as a first-time speaker, then Councillor Wainwright.
Thanks. I guess if I could broaden it, they're not just from capital projects, but perhaps grants that staff may be aware of. I believe Councillor Wainwright has mentioned this one before, something like the heat pump conversions. Some municipalities actually match funding for that. The CRD or BC Hydro or Fortis is offering, a rebate, and then some municipalities offer a rebate on top of that. And there may be other climate change adaptation and mitigation goals that other municipalities are matching through the CRD, or that we could get additional funding from other governments that we just haven't put up as a priority yet, that could be either brought forward now and we just haven't discussed because it was not in the strategic plan, or was so far, or as Councillor O'Keefe said, was further down the list, and we can bring it forward. So things that aren't just capital, but grant funding opportunities or matching grants that we can look at as well, which I guess would kind of fall within stimulus funding as well.
Councillor Wainwright, then Councillor O'Keefe.
So we are segueing a bit into the second topic, which is the stimulus measures, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I guess one of the aspects of this topic is timeliness, and that is, should we be doing some things now? And when I say now, I mean over the next couple of months. Or are there things that we should perhaps we may want to consider Build Back Better type of stuff and stimulus type of stuff next fiscal year. So that could be down the road. to me, the more urgent one for us to have a discussion about is, are there any things we should be doing over the next couple of months? Because if there is an appetite for that kind of thing, we should be figuring out what it is, what our priorities are, and whether we can do it quite soon. If we leave it to, not start having the discussion till August, for example, it's pretty obvious we're not going to be able to do anything in June, July. So I'm of the view, and I think we've been demonstrating it, that that actions taken early are more effective than comparable actions taken later. That it's better to try to encourage recovery and mitigate impacts early than to try to repair the damage later. So I would like to have a discussion about should we be thinking about doing stuff over the next couple of months, and if so, what?
Thank you, Councillor. I'll just perhaps make a comment or two. This is a good discussion. Again, we're now entering, I think, coming close to the end of the third month of the pandemic and the operation, the startup of the EOC. It's hard to believe. 3 months is a season, and we've chewed up a season of the year. But from the beginning, of the pandemic, we knew that this was an unprecedented disruption to our community, every aspect of our community. But as council members and as staff members, we're charged with the services provided by the town, both essential and non-essential services, and now the emergency operations services that we're providing. And it was a question that came up in our EOC discussions, and there's been some discussion in briefings to council and here in the chamber, that we do have a $10.1 million capital plan in 2020, which is just over 100 projects. They're not all large-scale projects, but there are a number of very significant projects that get you to $10 million. And quite frankly, I think we would have to agree that those projects are intended to build a better community. Staff have prioritized them. We approved them within the budget, looking forward to build a better community, whether it's what the next Beacon Wharf or replacement will be, or the improvements at Galeran, a traffic circle, whatever they be around the community. So I think we're in a kind of continuous loop, if you will, of trying to build a better community. But I appreciate that the nature of the pandemic and the disruption that it's caused does lead us to turn our minds, as other local governments are, as governments are at other levels, to look at opportunities. Is there a way to build your community back better? An aspect to that, I think, is resiliency. And the Mr. Mickelson, has presented this evening about plans for resiliency, and that will help us not only will help us in whatever next emergency our community or communities face. But in turning to capital projects, we have touched on in previous council meetings that we know we're undergoing an official community plan review. We know that's going to take at least another year and a half. That doesn't speak to the time sensitivity that Councillor Wainwright is speaking to in terms of building back better sooner. But it is the largest exercise the community can engage in terms of wanting to become a better community for the long run. We have our strategic plan, which we've spoken to, and I've spoken to an interest in advancing that, in bringing it forward to council with staff's input well before the normal late November date or mid-November date that we do. And again, going back to the beginning of the pandemic, and we received the update from staff in a memo on late last week that they have been reviewing the capital plan. They've had to readjust based on staffing being seconded to the EOC and other work changes such as working from home and having to physical distance out in the community when they're doing capital projects. And so we will see a report from staff about where the capital plan is in August. Is that a fair way from, through the year already? Well, the pandemic started when it did, and where we are in the pandemic. And so that, I think, is a reasonable time frame for us to receive that information. Again, that might not be doing something, as Councillor Wainwright has indicated. If there is an opportunity, we should be looking at it and trying to put that in place over the next couple of months. The challenge, as I think we all know on council, is that depending on the scale and scope of a capital project, it takes a significant planning. And when you're doing something significant in the community, we have to engage the community, whether it be the business community, the residents at large. We do have the survey. Over 320 businesses have responded, and we're now awaiting a report from the EOC in terms of the outcomes and the information from that report. So we are on a timeline to recover a stronger and a better community, appreciating the points that Councillor Wainwright is speaking to. But I look to council if we want to alter the timeline or request specific information to come back from staff that would cause us to want to proceed a little differently. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I appreciate the, wanting to act quickly to support the business community. On the other hand, I want to make sure that what we're doing is that we're not doing it just to be quick, but that we've put some thought into it, and that we're investing, what limited dollars we're going to have into the appropriate places and the appropriate sector. There are funds available through federal and provincial levels of government to assist people through the next little while. When I've taken a stroll downtown a couple times and talked to a few downtown businesses. Many of them have taken advantage of that. They're struggling, but they seemed optimistic. So I guess on one hand, first of all, I'm not sure that there's anything that the town could do in terms of economic stimulus or that would have a significant amount of difference to make a difference, I guess. What I prefer to do is to wait to see the results of the survey. I'd like to get some feedback from our Economic Advisory Committee, get the updated project list from town staff. I'd like to know more about how the different sectors have been impacted. We know that the downtown retail sector is suffered significantly, but I want to know about the other sectors, the marine industry and the industries on the west side of Sydney. So I guess I lean more towards gathering that information and bringing that into our strategic planning session as early as we can in August to talk about these things further.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I feel comfortable with the suggestion that Councillor O'Keefe has made, and with the Mayor's comments around being able to digest the information that we've surveyed and come up with a sensible approach forward in terms of how we're going to invest in projects to build back better. So I think I'm comfortable with those timelines referring to August. Where I do want some reassurance, if I may turn to staff, and that is around shovel-worthy projects now, so that we are well positioned, or at least assured that we're well positioned to be able to take advantage of, be it provincial or federal grant opportunities to pursue any specific projects where we may see opportunity. To me, there's a sense of urgency around at least being prepared in that sense. So if I may refer that question through to staff, please.
If I can, through the Mayor, to Councillor Rintoul, it's a challenging question. to say whether or not we have shovel-worthy projects right now that might be applicable for a grant opportunity. Until those stimulus grant opportunities and the details come forward, we really can't say, whether or not we'll have shovel-worthy projects that are ultimately ready. And the last thing we want to do is start coming up with projects that might fit into the shovel-worthy category and going through a design stage, etc. So I would say that what we need to do is as suggested, report back to council in August on where we are with our capital projects. At that point, we may have some more information in terms of opportunities for stimulus funding. But I think it's a challenging thing to respond to right now in terms of what might be appropriate in terms of shovel-worthy projects.
I have a comment, but I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul first.
Yeah, just a comment that, I understand without the terms of a grant having been issued and what projects may meet that criteria, that we can't zero in and look to have as-built drawings prepared. However, I guess the understanding would be that we would be remiss if we weren't well positioned to seize an opportunity if it's brought forward. And so to me, that's where there's a sense of urgency in terms of looking at staff resources. Would it be to have a discussion today around specificity? No, but to feel that staff resources are available when a grant opportunity presents itself. And again, I refer to Ms. May's comments that we should have this on our radar. I want to just ensure that staff could be nimble with respect to an opportunity of that nature.
Sorry, if I can again through the mayor, it's challenging to say whether or not, how nimble we'll be able to be in terms of where we are, in terms of what projects we have on the go, what staff resources we have available. We have an EOC that currently we have staff resources that are dedicated to that. So, and then we're getting into the summer schedule. We have, there's going to be staff vacations and those sorts of things. So again, it's very difficult for staff to be able to comment on this at this time, certainly.
Yeah, and council normally goes through a reduced schedule, but before making my comments, I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright and Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I don't think we can reasonably ask staff to start putting together shovel-ready projects without any guidance on what kind of projects might be eligible or not. I suspect we are going to have some shovel-ready projects because capital projects that we plan to do this year that we don't do I kind of expect we're going to have the design ready to go. They'd be shovel-ready. Hopefully they'll meet the criteria. If they don't, well, that would be unfortunate, but that could happen. One point I did want to make, though, for council's awareness, I attended Elizabeth May's last virtual town hall. Perhaps some of my colleagues did as well. But one of the questions that was posed came from somebody in the Sydney downtown retail community about what kind of support assistance might be coming, from the federal government for recovery and economic relief and so on. And our MP has been involved in a lot of discussions at committee level and such, but one of the comments she made was that she's seeing a lot of federal departments coming up with ideas and looking at things they can do for their sector. So for example, DFO focusing on fisheries, there's a focus on agriculture, there's a focus on tourism, there's a specific focus that aligns with a certain department's mandate. So maybe in indigenous stuff, infrastructure generally fits in because they've got existing programs for infrastructure support to local governments and so on. But she said there's no federal department that deals with a functioning downtown. There would be a department that deals with employment generally and keeping employees working. And then there is the financial assistance to businesses at large, whether they're retail or otherwise. But she basically said that that don't expect the federal government to be looking at the survival of Sydney's downtown. They will likely be responding to infrastructure in a general way and specific sectors like tourism, hospitality, for example. So we should be, our downtown would be something that is clearly a local government focus. So the buck stops with us, and there is a chance that we may see the provincial government come up with something focused on downtown surviving, but they seem to work on a ministry sector type basis too. And I don't know if I would hold my breath expecting a senior government to come up with a relief measure for our downtown core. I think we should be thinking about that ourselves, because I think there is a real possibility that we're not going to see that come from the senior governments. And I would prefer not to be caught short by not having any discussion or thought about it until it's painfully clear that the senior governments aren't going to do it. Anyway, that's just something for us to be thinking about.
Thank you, Councillor. And if I could comment next, I think I had Councillor O'Keefe. You wanted to speak again?
Yes, now?
Sure, I'll let you go first.
Okay, thanks. Just sort of building on Councillor Rintoul's points, I'm also, concerned, having plans in place. And, I appreciate, staff's comments about it's difficult to know what the government is going to come up with. And yeah, that's true. But I think that there's some fairly predictable things. You can look at, things like active transportation, things to encourage tourism. Later in the agenda package, we're talking about building a new, whether we need a new feature built somewhere on the Pat Bay Highway to entice tourists to come into town. To me, that's something that I'm sure would fall into a grant proposal somewhere. Having more bike storage in the downtown area to, help people move around easier down there. I think that there's a number of things that we could have ready without knowing the exact details of what the grants are. And I point to like Central Saanich, they've had their list, they've got their shovel-ready projects done a month ago. So I know other municipalities are able to do it. If there's a stumbling block for us in terms of resources, or if council needs to consider reprioritizing things, I would rather do that rather than say we can't do it. Tell us what we have to reprioritize to make sure that we can be ready to take advantage of those things. And just one other thing that I'll toss in on the topic of accessibility again. I guess I'd like staff to think about, there are some new grants that have been announced through the provincial and federal government, which I'll talk about later, for accessible projects. So perhaps be thinking about, are there things in the downtown area or in town hall perhaps that we've been thinking of doing from an accessibility perspective that we could have ready to apply for as well. That's all for me. Thanks.
Thank you. Comments in two areas. One is about business sectors, and the other is with regards to this comment with regards to shovel-ready. So historically in Sydney, if I think back over the last 20 years, we've received some federal infrastructure grants. We received them for the fishing pier. We received them for the aquarium. I know there was another one. I'm not sure if Mary Winspear didn't receive one some 20 years ago. And they were in the $800,000 to $1 million range, $500,000 to $1 million range. And I think we, at the time that those infrastructure grants were awarded, our municipality and community leaders considered it a tremendous success to attract that level of opportunity, funding to come to the community. So I'm not going to suggest that we should only look for $1 million or what have you, but that's a magnitude that we've seen in the past with regards to combined federal provincial infrastructure grants. In terms of speaking with shovel-ready, Ray Creek is shovel-ready in terms of we're waiting for the government. We have allocated $900,000 to that. We anticipated even costing more than that when we take into effect the parkscape improvements that will be required to be done afterwards. I think that, and quite frankly, MP Elizabeth May has spoken to keeping our eyes open for an infrastructure grant for that particular project. So I would consider it a significant win if we were able to attract a grant. Again, we're going to have to wait until provincial federal programs come forward in terms of whether that particular shovel-ready project comes forward. In terms of grants, it's in staff's DNA to look for grants. When we approved the underground wiring project at Fifth and Bevan, the grant application through Hydro was done, and if I recall, the magnitude was something like $180,000 or $200,000. So, you know, our staff have a lot of experience with grants, and I think I have some comfort in them with the current capital plan continuing to look for grant opportunities as they make themselves available. Do you wait for, do you try and anticipate what a particular grant is going to be and then alter your capital plan to suit that? That's not a direction municipalities typically go. We've set priorities through our strategic plan and through our capital plan, and again, we'll continue to look for funding or grant opportunities as they arise. But this is a good discussion. I'd like to just turn to and this may be a little bit about stimulus, which we haven't really fully engaged in yet. But when we take a look at the downtown, and it's already come out from the EOC with regards to the business survey about we're going to see, they feel that there's a good representation from the different sectors downtown. Having had the experience of being a founding member of the BIA, establishing the BIA, we took a look at all of the business licenses in Sydney, not just the downtown. We had to go and find out which ones were actually in the downtown out of the total license registry. And it was interesting to see that there was 35 hair salons and barbers. It was interesting to see that there was 4 travel agencies, that there was over a dozen real estate agencies, that there was the hotel accommodations, that there was 40 restaurants, cafes, and food services. And so those are all sectors, but when we look at the impact of COVID, it's impacted the 12 real estate agencies in terms of the real estate market. It's impacted the travel agencies in terms of the international travel restrictions. It's impacted restaurants in terms of the physical distancing limitations. So I think when, is there going to be one measure that's going to come from any level of government that's going to say, okay, this is going to be a significant stimulus for the downtown? You have to, I think, relate it to what sector or sectors that we're speaking with. We do have what we would call a general retail sector, which is generally, carries inventory or has services that it provides to the public. But quite frankly, that sector has actually shrunk over the last 10 years for a variety of reasons. And yes, it requires help, but again, I don't think there's any one measure that is necessarily going to impact the downtown. When you start to look at things like sidewalk improvements or accessibility and those sorts of things, I think those are the types of policy areas that we can certainly have an impact that will impact the businesses. Does a real estate agent today need more accessibility? the way they operate. It depends on the sector we're referring to. So just a comment about shovel ready and a comment about stimulus and sectors. I didn't have another councillor on the speaking list. Did someone wish to speak next? Okay, Councillor Wainwright, did you want to speak to stimulus at all?
We had a discussion when we were setting the tax rates, property tax rates, and the idea of stimulus measures came up, and the thought was putting some money into stimulus measures. I think council probably is of the mind to consider doing that, and if we were going to have a discussion of that nature, part of framing that discussion would be how much money are we thinking about going into stimulus measures? Where are we going to get the suggestions of what stimulus measures, what options might be out there for us to consider, and essentially organizing, having that discussion. I do think we should have that discussion. I don't think stimulus measures are necessarily part of being more resilient or build back better. They could contribute to those things, but stimulus measures can simply do something to stimulate the economy without creating resilience or doing build back better. So I think there is some policy discussion for council to have, and I think we should have that discussion. The question is whether we should have that discussion earlier or later. I'm of the view that if we leave it to later, that we forego the opportunity of potentially having some effect early. I would like to see us have the discussion earlier rather than later, personally.
Okay, well, having it on the agenda this evening, I think it's open to have that discussion now. I don't know is there information that we would want prior to having a discussion? I mean, part of it, I think, is maybe the business survey results, but Councillor Rintoul?
Yeah, if I may, Mr. Mayor, in part, in comment to your question, yes, I think perhaps the survey results will enable council to help zero in on where there may be some recommendations in there for us to focus on. But another part of this equation all along has been, as Councillor Wainwright pointed out, certainly around a discussion intended on stimulus, but also taking a look at the other side of our budget, and that being expenses, I guess to give us the confidence that we know the sort of dollar value we would have to work with in addressing stimulus possibilities. And so the tax incentives we created around reductions to commercial taxation affected our revenue side of the budget equation. I think in preparation for discussion around stimulus, we need to take a look at where we're at in the expense side of the equation and whether or not that means council looking critically at some of those expenses and or just seeing what the results of the pandemic changes have made to expenses. Perhaps we haven't realized expenses in areas where we thought we would, giving us some latitude in the budget to apply to stimulus. So I think in answer to your comment, yeah, there probably is some background information we need, I think, to have a detailed discussion on stimulus.
Thank you. Other discussion? Councillor Follett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I really appreciate having this conversation, this discussion. So thank you, Councillor Wainwright, for bringing it up. And further to Councillor Rintoul's comments, I think that is a very realistic and important aspect to look at at the dollars. And then I would go so far as to say, I'm not necessarily convinced that in order for us to look at stimulus, that necessarily means expending dollars. I think businesses are in business to do their business, and we shouldn't be doing their job for them. What we can do is say, we're open to flexibility, and tell us how we can help you, how we can better assist you. So I think if we wait for the results of the survey to see what comes out of that. I was just going through social media today, and I see that one of the restaurants in town, not in the downtown core, but certainly in Sydney, is looking at, they were announcing that they're going to be open towards the end of the month, and they're doing raffles, and everybody who likes their Facebook page entered into a draw to win a gift certificate. I think that's absolutely wonderful. I think that's a really positive thing. But if a restaurant or any other business came to us and said, you know, we need to do this, but the stumbling block is the red tape in order to get the process rolled along, that's when we can say, okay, how can we set the red tape aside so that we still do follow the rules and everything, but make it easier for them to do what they need to do. I think that's a positive outcome for stimulus. And I think that's what our role is as local government. It's not necessarily handing out dollars, but it's turning around, how can we help you do what you need to do? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, seeing no further discussion, did you wish to comment lastly at all, Councillor Wainwright?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess the third item, and it isn't listed specifically, but it comes out of the Chief Mickelson's comments earlier tonight. I think we should have a discussion about repurposing public space in the downtown, because where things have left off, we've had a lot of residents and some businesses suggesting that we should look at, or we should consider repurposing public space, closing a lane, closing both lanes, letting businesses spill out into the street, that kind of stuff. The EOC has identified pedestrian pinch points to the extent they can. There's signage up where they can't repurpose public space. Where there is an opportunity to repurpose public space, they've done so. If they find more opportunities, they'll bring them forward. Businesses can apply based on the bylaw amendments we've just made to use public space. But if the town wants to consider doing something, maybe closure of a lane on the weekend, whatever, that is something for the policy group to have a discussion about. And if we never have that discussion, by default, we won't be doing anything. So I think it's now obvious that we should have that discussion. We may decide it's not practical to do something. There may be good reasons not to. But I think we should be planning to have that discussion. And I think we are going to need input from the community to inform that discussion. I'm also hesitant. I don't think that asking questions in the resident survey is going to get us necessarily the kind of input we need. So for example, you ask people about widening the, repurposing the parking spaces in front of Sydney Bakery, etc., and people give you a response. But it turns out that some people were expecting that when you were going to repurpose it, you would build it up to the level so that it was seamless with the existing sidewalk level. So the devil is in the details, and they'll give you different responses when they see a specific proposal than if you ask them a very general question like, are you in favor of closing a lane to allow more pedestrian use? So I'm not sure how we're going to, I think we need to have the discussion, and I think that we're going to actually have to, if we see merit in pursuing something, we're going to actually have to put a proposal in front of people to comment on. I don't think the general questions in the survey are going to give us the kind of input we need.
Okay, thank you for that. Any comment on Councillor Wainwright's third topic? Okay, thank you for that discussion. We'll move on to, sorry? Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. No, I agree with Councillor Wainwright that it's good to have that discussion at some point. In terms of repurposing the space, I guess the information that I would like to have before then is a little bit more detail from staff in terms of the numbers of businesses that come forward with requests to expand their space, and to get an idea of the amount of space that we're going to need, and whether closing off streets or further is something that will help and facilitate that. So I think it's good to do, but I'd like just a little bit more information before having the discussion.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, let's turn to item 11B, which is Councillor O'Keefe, and you have your referral to the Economic Advisory Committee and your report on access awareness. I don't know which you'd like to give first.
Oh, I'll do access awareness first, because it kind of might segue a little bit into the other one. So last week was National Accessibility Week, and normally the town would have acknowledged and supported this by funding an event, usually at the Shoals Center, but due to COVID-19, that didn't happen. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to remind council and the community about the issue of accessibility and provide some info on some new initiatives and some new resources. I sat in on a webinar this past week that was sponsored by Small Business BC and the President's Group, which is a network of 25 business leaders who are champions for more accessible and exclusive workplaces. And the webinar was how to become an inclusive employer after COVID-19. And there's been these sorts of workshops before, but what was different about this one was that they were pointing out that the pandemic has taught us some lessons about what is possible. And I think we've seen that in other spheres as well, is that when businesses or communities are forced due to circumstances to make change, that they do and they adapt. And so what they were pointing out in this webinar is that the things that employers in the past have thought weren't doable or feasible found that they were doable. So things, for example, like working at home, having different hours of operation and different shifts, accommodating the needs of their staff who maybe had underlying health issues or childcare issues, or didn't have a computer at home. So they found a way to make things work. And so their point through this was that a lot of times persons who have disabilities, they are employable, but they need a little bit of accommodation with something. And so their message to other employers was that, look at, you're capable of doing more than you think. And so consider, hiring persons with disabilities. They gave a lot of good tips on hiring practices, how to reduce barriers, creating an accessible workplace. And I won't go into all of that, but just to say that the details can be found at accessibleemployers.ca. And I'll plan to share this with the Chamber, the SBIA, and our EAC for their information. The second thing I wanted to touch on was accessible tourism. And so we know that one of the hardest hit sectors of our economy here in Sydney and the Greater Victoria area is the tourism sector. As a result, Destination BC is focusing its campaigns on local markets, so within BC. And now they've launched a new campaign to focus on accessible tourism. Persons with disabilities and their families want to travel, but their options are often limited due to difficulties finding communities that have suitable accommodation, accessible restaurants, shops, attractions, parking, etc. So Destination BC suggests all tourism businesses should be investing in products and services to cater to this rapidly growing market. To provide support, the Destination BC website also has tips on access to buildings, accommodations, attractions, and how businesses can make their premises more accessible. So as Sydney looks for ways to recover from the pandemic and build resiliency, I think this is one of those things that presents an opportunity for us to market ourselves as an accessible destination. We all have a number of things going for us. We're flat. We're already doing some pretty good things in terms of accessibility. And I think with a bit more tweaking and some marketing campaign, this could be something that would be a benefit to our economy. So I forward that suggestion to the SBIA and the Chamber of Commerce, and I'll refer that to the EAC for their consideration as well. I don't necessarily see the town doing a marketing campaign, but if the business community decides that that's something that they want to do, and getting to Councillor Fallett's earlier point about, looking at not necessarily the town providing stimulus dollars, but what are the things that we can do to help support initiatives like that. The final thing I'll talk about, in terms of accessibility is new funding. So last week, both the provincial and federal governments announced 2 different funds that provides funding for projects that make Canadian communities and workplaces more accessible. They're eligible, or they're open to not-for-profit organizations, businesses, and small municipalities. So for things like building ramps, accessible doors, accessible washrooms, constructing universally designed offices. And so those details are available on, firstly, the Employment and Social Development Canada website, and the provincial grants will be posted on the website for disabilityalliancebc.org later this summer. And that's what I have to say about accessibility, unless anybody has questions.
Councillor Fallett. Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Councillor Fallett.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe, for that report. And as you were speaking, and I thought back to an earlier conversation regarding federal funding and shovel-ready projects. And in your research, when you were looking at grants, Councillor O'Keefe, I was thinking about the waterfront walkway along Lochside. And of course, the upper walkway is now hard surfaced. The bottom walkway, the one closest to the water, is still gravel. And I know for people who are using mobility aids, that's a real challenge. And I'm wondering if putting a hard surface on that, from what you've read so far, would any grant opportunities be there, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. Just based on the little bit of information they provided, something like that sounds like it would definitely fall within the parameters of what they're looking at. So yeah, definitely.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Fallett. Councillor Rentula.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to Councillor O'Keefe for her fulsome report on this. And one item I noted that you made reference to, Councillor O'Keefe, was referring the reports that you were in possession of to the EAC, and I know your next agenda item specifically references the Economic Advisory Committee, and my suggestion would be that if you're sharing the report to the EAC, that it's for information purposes and not instructive from council to to act on it, but that it's part of a pool of resources for the EAC as they look to reactivate under the terms of the upcoming motion. So thank you for your attention to that.
Yeah, thanks. And that, yes, and that was my intention.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, did you wish to go on to your referral?
Yeah, so getting on to EAC. So a little bit of preamble, I guess, first. So as we've been responding to this pandemic for the last 3 months, it's been an unusual sort of an emergency situation. You know, it's not like a fire or earthquake or a flood where there's been widespread damage to buildings or infrastructure or roadways or loss of life, but there has been a significant impacts to our economy as we've been discussing. And dozens of businesses, of course, have been closed and suffered large losses. Others have been doing very well. So anyways, it makes sense, I think, that we follow what has been recommended by the BC Economic Development Association and something that's being done by other communities throughout the province and across Canada, and that is to bring together representatives of our business community to help us in analyzing the economic impacts and what needs to be done next to adjust and become more resilient in the future. What I'd be interested to hear from the EAC is, as we talked about earlier, a better understanding of how the different business sectors have been impacted, looking at the different trends that we saw during the pandemic, and what does the business community need to do to adjust, and how can the town support them? Some ideas for stimulus. And yeah, what are the opportunities here to be doing something different? So based on that, getting to the motion, whereas many business sectors in the town of Sydney have been negatively impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, and whereas the Economic Advisory Committee represents a broad cross-section of business sectors and is well positioned to understand the impacts of the pandemic on the local economy, and whereas the town desires to adapt and prosper as a diverse commercial center for business and employment, be it resolved that the Economic Advisory Committee be convened to share lessons learned and best practices amongst their members and their respective sectors on matters related to the economic impact of the pandemic, and based on this, provide suggestions to council on actions and initiatives to support economic recovery from the pandemic.
Second.
Discussion. Councillor O'Keefe, did you wish to, you had a good preamble there.
Yeah, I get, you know, I'll just give one as sort of an example. So I'd like to hear from the EAC about one of the trends, of course, that has affected the retail sector, of course, was, well, they weren't open. So a lot of people started doing online shopping, and that is a trend that is expected to continue. And so there's some concern about how our downtown retailers will be able to survive. And you know, one of the things that people like about our town is that we have a nice downtown area, eclectic selection of shops and things. So if we start to see empty storefronts, that's going to impact our ability to attract more people here. So maybe we want to look at things. One suggestion came up in one seminar I was at about how do we encourage small entrepreneurs. Maybe we carve up retail space into smaller chunks. And what does the private sector need to do to accommodate that? And what does the town need to do in terms of our bylaws to support that? Perhaps kiosks, business kiosks on a short-term basis. So just one example of something that we might do.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And so I appreciate Councillor O'Keefe bringing this forward, and I concur the timing is right to formally activate the EAC. I'll acknowledge that the acting chair of the EAC has been very good about keeping in touch with members of the EAC, sort of informally, and I can sense there's an appetite there for this seasoned group of the business owners and operators and managers to come together and offer some of their insights to benefit the town. So happy to support this motion.
Thank you. Any further discussion? I'll call a question. All those in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. I just have a suggestion for council, if they wish to make a motion. I mentioned earlier under my mayor's report that the SIP Economic Recovery Task Force is proceeding and has a definite plan now, and I would like to, while I may be making presentation to our respective, or our colleague neighboring councils, we'll also be sharing it with the BIA and the Chamber. I would ask that council consider referring that presentation for information to the EAC as well.
Yes, if you're looking for a motion to do so, I would move so.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion or questions? Call a question. All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. We'll now go to Councillor Fallett, and you have a council report with regards to your liaison role with Viral, our library.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Short report, and that's to inform everybody that our library will be opening up again starting this Thursday, or is it Thursday, June 11th anyhow. And it's reduced service. It's called takeout service. Information is at virl.bc.ca/takeout. And I'll just quickly give the hours. It's closed Monday and Tuesday, or Sunday and Monday, and open Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Tuesday is 2 to 4 and 5 to 7. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, the library has the takeout service from 10 to 12 and 2 to 4 in the afternoon. So information about what and how to do things is online, but I also encourage people to go online to the library service, because there's just a phenomenal array of things that are now available through our library service. They've also partnered with the YMCA, and they've got online exercise classes, and there's just, something over 1,000 magazines, newspapers and whatnot. There's online classes. Language courses have been the great thing during pandemic. People are learning new languages. There's all sorts of things. So I really encourage people to take advantage of that, which is available. All you need is a library card. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, for that brief but important update. We don't have any committee reports, but we do have, we'll now turn to staff reports on item 13A. So we have a official community plan amendment referral from our neighboring North Saanich with regards to their bylaw number 1487 with regards to Panorama Recreation Center at 1885 Forest Park Drive, and a report from staff.
I'll move the recommendation that staff be directed to reply to the District of North Saanich with a statement of no concerns regarding proposed North Saanich official community plan bylaw number 1130, amending bylaw number 1487.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Councillor Garna.
Sorry, turn my microphone off. If this goes forward and they build a library at the rec center, I'm assuming that we will take over full responsibility of the library on Resthaven, since that's now a split. Would that be the case or not?
Both libraries, should there be two, would be Virl's responsibility, so the entire system pays into the operation of both.
Okay, all right. With regards to maybe this is a question to Mr. Councillor Rintoul, because you sit on the Recreation Commission. I was looking at the map and I'm trying to figure out where exactly the library would go on the property. Do you know specifically from the plans?
If I may, and the mayor can correct me if my recollection is incorrect, but was on the northwest corner of that property. So there's a sort of a large parking lot area there now, and a trail backs in behind that.
So it's likely that the trail would be used up for the space for the library?
I don't particularly know the answer to that. However, I've seen the suggestion of that nature in some correspondence to North Saanich Council that was a concern.
I don't specifically have concerns about withdrawing from the LR and getting the land for that purpose, but I do have concerns about the loss of green space in terms of where it would be placed. So just to bring that point forward.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. If I could clarify on a couple of points. So one is what we're being asked to comment on or provide comment is North Saanich is making an amendment to their official community plan, and as per statutory requirement, they are required to consult with neighboring municipalities if they have comment on that. They're just making the change in their official community plan with regards to a particular community use. This is not, North Saanich is not requesting Sydney's comment on aspects of a library at the Panorama site. But for clarification, yes, Councillor Rintoul identified the location on the site. However, North Saanich is, or the Commission would consider, and North Saanich would propose, there are options which can include an addition that would be attached to the existing building, which would minimize the impact on green space, or a standalone. And again, design has to become a feature. But this is just step one. As was indicated in the staff report, North Saanich made a referral to withdraw approximately 2 acres from the ALR for community use. That was turned down, but in the letter that came back was the suggestion that consideration be given to withdrawing the entire 16 acres, which is the entire Panorama lands. And the reason for that is Panorama Commission over the last 20 years has done 3 or 4 improvements to the facility which have required going to the ALR on an individual case-by-case basis, and by having an exclusion of the entire facility, the majority of which is recreation, would remove the need for Panorama making any further improvements or expansions to the facility itself, but it would also facilitate North Saanich if they chose, and again, they are also having public hearing to pursue a library. And just to build on Mr. Hissick's comment with regards to library service, I think it's well known in the community that Sydney and North Saanich share the operation of the Sydney North Saanich branch with Virl, and that at such time that North Saanich makes a decision in North Saanich for a change to library service or addition to library service, they would be making a decision, and we would certainly respect that community's process in choosing how they wish to proceed with a community service such as that. And they would have options whether they use Virl or whether they use the Greater Victoria Public Library. And at such time that they wish to enter into discussion, we could have conversation about the existing branch located in Sydney and the fact that we currently have a partnership in the operation of that branch. Councillor?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, no, I'm well aware of what they're asking us. I just wanted to make those points known. So.
No, just for the public, that we're not actually making comment on the library tonight. Seeing no other further discussion, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. So I'll move to item 13B, which is temporary expanded service area authorization for liquor licenses, and we have a staff report dated June 2nd.
I'll move the recommendation that staff be directed to advise the BC Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch that the town of Sydney wishes to participate in their expedited process for permitting the expansion of service areas.
Do we have a seconder?
Second.
Seconded for discussion. Any comment or questions from staff? Councillor Garnett.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the staff, is this, so are we talking about a blanket sort of proposal so that we wouldn't be looking at each individual application as it came forward?
Through the mayor to Councillor Garnett. So that is it. That is the intent. That is the recommendation. There is the other option that's identified in the report that if council desires, they can look at it on a case-by-case basis as well.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, yeah, I prefer that second option. I would prefer to be able to discuss each individual application and the merits therein, rather than have just a blanket allowing everybody just to go forward and speed up. I understand the point behind doing it, but I still like the fact that council should be able to have some kind of comment on it.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Keefe and Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. Actually, I'm in favor of this for a couple reasons. The expedited thing, I think, those businesses want to get back up and running as soon as possible. So whatever barriers we can remove without too much inconvenience, I think is a good thing to do. And I understand Councillor Garnett's concern, but my understanding is that in our discussion previously of businesses, cafes that want to extend out into the sidewalk or to the parking lot, if they're going to extend their outdoor space, they're going to have to come to us anyways. So I'm just wanting, maybe can staff confirm that my understanding is correct, is that even if a business went to the LCRB and got their approval, they have to comply with all local bylaws, and we are putting in bylaws in place that are governing those outdoor spaces, so that if they weren't doing what we wanted them to do, that staff would see that when the request for the permit is through you, through the mayor to staff. Is my understanding of that correct?
Mr. Newcomb.
Yes, thank you. Through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe. Yes and no. So it depends on the type of space. If a business, say, had free outdoor space on private property that is not parking, they would be able to go ahead and use that space without any input from the town, essentially, for the expanded liquor license purposes. If the space is covered by one of the town's bylaws, like off-street parking or public space on public space on a sidewalk or something, then yes, they would need the town's approval in that case. So it really depends on the situation.
So just a follow-up question to Mr. Newcomb.
Certainly.
So when those businesses get their business license, do they not have to say, to identify when they're getting their license, what specific areas, like the square footage of their premises that they're going to be using for their cafe or restaurant, and that based on that we determine parking or other sorts of requirements? So I'm just wondering if what they applied for in their business license is different because they're going to go onto a private space, would they still not have to come back and check in with the town on something like that?
In the town's business license, in most cases, no. In a liquor license, when a business applies for their liquor license, they're required in most cases by the LCRB to specify areas that are licensed. So a specific portion of the building where alcohol will be served is noted by the LCRB, and essentially that's where they can serve alcohol, period. You can alter that by going back to the LCRB and asking to alter it. But what this would do is allow that space to be altered without essentially that original plan, without that original plan being revised within the confines of the maximum, the other regulations like maximum occupancy load, things like that. So they would be able to expand the space, but not necessarily expand the number of people that they're serving. Same number of people, larger space. So it just gives them the flexibility to essentially maintain the size of their service that they had pre-COVID in a larger area. And then whether or not they would need the town's permission in terms of using public space or off-street parking, that would be a case-by-case basis. But what this change does, it would set the stage for them to not have to get an individual approval to use that expanded liquor licensing space.
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay, we do have Councillor Duncan and Councillor Raymond, but I'd just like to touch on a point of clarification with Councillor O'Keefe mentioning cafes and restaurants. Again, in the staff report, it made the distinction that where this policy authorization would be with regards to liquor primary licenses, and manufacturer licenses, that is pubs and distilleries. So most of the cafes and restaurants in the downtown have food primary licenses that also serve liquor, but this policy doesn't apply to that. It only applies to businesses that have liquor primary, and the report does indicate that we have a very low number of liquor primary licenses and manufacturer licenses in town. In fact, I'm aware of two, the Charles Dickens Pub as a liquor license, and Victoria Distillers as a manufacturer's license. So we're talking about a small number of businesses that would be impacted by this, but that's just for reference and clarification. I'll now turn to Councillor Duncan before I make comment, insert myself as speaker after Councillor Wainwright. Councillor Duncan, then Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You anticipated this was my clarification, and that when they said very few, I was surprised because I thought only the one, and then I thought later about the Charles Dickens. So are there in fact other pubs that are a liquor primary license, or are we talking about, in reality, two businesses?
Through the mayor to Councillor Duncan. Surprisingly, the town doesn't keep a list of exact businesses and their liquor license type. We should probably start doing that. More surprisingly, the LCRB does not keep a ready list of businesses in Sydney and their liquor license type. But we racked our brains, and yes, we came up with the Dickens Pub and Distillery.
Great, thank you.
Did you wish to continue, Councillor? Okay. Councillor Wainwright.
The point I wanted to make's been already raised, so I'll pass.
Thank you, Councillor. Being next on the speaker list, my comment is that with the very few businesses that would be impacted, and given that we have the flexibility to call special council meetings, which we have done during this pandemic, I would be, and also, sorry, given the experience that we've had with the Cut Cartel and the liquor license that we chose to comment on back to the LCRB, I would be in favor of choosing the second option to continue doing what we're as we are now, but expedite as quickly as we are able to consider. And a question through to staff is that if we did choose option 2, would that have the requirement of us having to issue public notice as we did with the cartel application, which does lengthen the process?
I think the answer to that is no. But I don't think the LCRB has clearly defined this process to the point where we have a clear answer on that from them.
Okay. Thank you for. Okay. Thank you. Any further speakers? Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Your interest in continuing our existing process, we don't need to make any kind of motion to do that. And my understanding is that if we changed our mind and did want to take advantage of the expedited process, we can make a motion of that effect later. So it might make sense to simply withdraw the motion, do nothing, and if circumstances evolve such that we do want to take advantage of this expedited process, we could revisit it later.
Thank you. Appreciate those points. Do other councillors wish to comment on the motion on the floor? Councillor Rintoul.
Yeah, thank you. Given the report that we're hearing that it's a very limited number of businesses that are affected, I would be fine with doing as has been suggested, to withdraw the motion. I will point out, however, just to be clear to those watching, that this is a temporary measure. It would expire regardless come October 31st, and so it's not a long-term change that we're looking at implementing and authorizing without the sort of consultation that we're accustomed to. And so, frankly, I'm somewhat indifferent in that respect. Thank you.
Any further comment? So I'll turn to the mover. If you wish to proceed, then we will proceed
Yeah, I
with the
know,
question.
I know at least one, I heard at least one council colleague, comment that they were interested in supporting it. So let's just let the motion stand. If it's defeated, it's defeated.
No, very good. Okay, with no further discussion, I'll call the question. All those in favor? We have one in favor. Those opposed? The motion is defeated. Thank you. Thank you for that discussion. Thank you for the report from staff. Now turn to item 13C, which is license of occupation, the entrance feature at Beacon Avenue and Highway 17. We did this, I think, did we do this 1 year ago? If just a quick question to staff. And this is the anniversary? 2 years ago. Okay, thank you. And we do have a recommendation.
I'll move that the license of occupation with the Airport Travel Lodge 0928818 BC Limited for town's use of the lands at the corner of Beacon Avenue and Highway 17 for a 2-year term, June 1st, 2020 to May 31st, 2022, be approved.
Second.
Discussion? Councillor O'Keefe.
I'm in favor of proceeding with just because it's only $200, but I do appreciate and support staff's suggestion that I think we need to consider a more significant entrance feature on that corner, maybe even down by McTavish. My recollection from previous discussions, maybe it was from the previous Economic Development Committee, one of the reports we had done on the huge amount of traffic that just passes Sydney by because there's nothing to entice them to stop. And so I think, especially at a time when we're going to want to attract as many people as we can when tourism numbers are low, I think it's worthwhile to look at having a more significant entrance feature. I'm not sure when the time is to discuss that, whether it's now or we put it on the agenda for some other time, whether it's something we want to get thoughts from our new EAC. So I'm curious to hear what other members of councils, if they have thoughts on that. Thank you.
Councillor Fallot.
Thank you. I certainly think it is worth having a conversation about. While I'm in agreement to keep this space for the next 2-year contract, I think we missed the boat by not having signs beyond right at Beacon Avenue saying here is Sydney. If we're looking at saying this is Sydney, having something right there is absolutely perfect. But I think we should look at how we market our town and do that. I think that's a conversation we should have at some point. Yes.
I have a quick question through to staff. Can somebody convert 28 square meters to feet?
It's roughly, I think, roughly 300 square feet.
Okay, thank you. Do we know if there's any opportunity to, if we had a feature, a significant idea whether there's an opportunity to increase the lease area beyond 300 square feet? Has that ever been entertained or discussed?
Ms. Nelson was saying it was bigger before. I can't recall, but I know it was the area that was certainly defined by the occupation of Wanda previously, right. And I think that's what dictated the overall mm-hmm. area itself in terms of the license occupation on that land. Whether or not it's feasible to expand that, I think it would be a challenge because you're getting into the drive aisle area, et cetera, for that whole commercial development, the McDonald's, et cetera. So it might be a challenge to encroach further into the private property there.
Okay, thank you for that. I have a suggestion if my math is correct. So it's a 2-year lease, which would take us to 2022, which would be the last year of our council mandate. And we're we're looking at completing our official community plan before the end of our mandate. I might ask council to consider a motion to extend this to 3 years, which would take it into the first half of the first year of the next council, letting us go through the processes that we are through the balance of our term.
So you're looking for an amendment to the motion then, as opposed
I'm
to?
just suggesting it to council. This was done 2 years ago by the previous council. We're talking about $200 a year. This is a placeholder for future plans. Who knows what idea might come up during OCP or community engagement.
Yeah, fair enough. I'll move that amendment that the period of lease be revised to 3 years.
Second.
Does staff have any comment on doing that?
Yeah, we think they would be good with that.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? Councillor O'Keefe on the amendment?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's fine. My only comment is that if we were going to do another significant feature, that's not the place that I would do it. That's on a corner where it's, that's where the corner where there's the gas station, the dollar store, etc., right?
That's
so that's northbound traffic. So people are racing to get the ferry. So if I was looking to look for a more suitable location, I'd be looking for something on the highway for southbound, people coming off of the ferry, and something before they got to the Beacon intersection. So I'll vote against it just because I don't see that particular place is a good spot for a feature anyways. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fallett.
Thank you. I'll just go to say I'm fine with extending it into the 3 years and leaving it for the next council to make the decision about that. I certainly do concur with Councillor O'Keefe's comments. I don't think that's an ideal spot long-term to do signage. I think that's not advantageous to us. To have some sort of feature there, don't have an issue with it, but I think we can do better than that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'll note that there is a termination clause number 15 that either party can terminate the agreement upon 30 days. If during our stimulus discussions or in community engagement, otherwise community engagement comes up with a good idea elsewhere in our community, we would always have the option to bring this agreement to an end fairly quickly. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call a question on the amendment. All those in favor? Opposed? We have one opposed, Councillor O'Keefe. That motion carries. Any further discussion on the main motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? We have one opposed, Councillor O'Keefe. The motion carries. Thank you. We'll now move to item 13D, which is a tender award for paving and concrete curb program, contract number 2020-003, and a report from staff dated June 2nd with a recommendation.
I'll move the recommendation that the contract for 2020 paving and extruded concrete curb program, contract number 2020-003, be awarded to the low bidder, Capital City Paving Limited, at a total cost of $160,649 plus taxes.
Second.
Discussion? Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When I looked at this, I did put a question forward to staff because I was wondering, in light of the fact that we're expecting reduced revenues this year, that we've got a report later on that talks about we might need to put more funding into the EOC, maybe economic stimulus things. And so I just wondered whether the particular work that's being proposed, whether how critical it is, if it's something that could be postponed, whether we could use that money to put into active transportation instead. So that was sort of on my mind. What I did get back from staff is that it wouldn't really make much of a difference because these particular, these projects are being paid for out of reserve funds, so it wouldn't have much of an impact. So I thought I'd pass that along as part of the conversation.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Duncan?
Councillor O'Keefe, if it makes you feel better, I think it's probably very necessary repaving work on Ardwell because there's holes in there that big enough they're bigger than my bike tire. So this time it's good for active transportation if that makes you feel better.
A question through to staff. Does that include those little potholes at the Ardwell McDonald Park Road junction that have been an ongoing challenge?
To the mayor, the map showing where the work is actually included in the package, and it doesn't include that. It is Ardwell between just near Bowerbank and Ardwell near Rest Haven.
Thank you. Thank you for referring me to the map that was provided. Okay, any other discussion? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. Item 13E is the 2020 Emergency Management Budget. We have a report from our EOC Director dated June 1st.
I'll move that the report dated June 1st, 2020 regarding the 2020 Emergency Management Budget be received for information.
Second.
Discussion? Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to staff, the $30,000 for staff benefits that they're not covering, and referring to benefits for overtime and backfill. Can you just give a little more explanation as to what that is?
Sure. Through the mayor to Councillor Garnett, yes. So for staff overtime and for backfilling, so EMBC does provide for any staff that are seconded to work in the EOC to backfill those staff. They pay the wages, but they do not pay the benefits. So those benefits, the costs are borne by the town.
Okay. So there are benefits attached to the overtime?
Correct.
Great. Okay, thanks for the clarification.
Thank you, Councillor.
Yeah.
Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a comment. I want to just say I agree with the suggestion from Chief Mickelson about the need to look at the scope and the degree of our response. When we looked at I don't know, one of the last, I think it was the last reports that we got, I think from Smart Risk, there was a myriad of potential projects or activities there. Some of them are maybe good things, but I think it's good to have a discussion in terms of council as a policy group. How do we see, what do we think is appropriate scope and the degree that we should be responding to these things? So I'll look forward to our further discussions on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion carries unanimous, and thank you for that report. Turn to the item 13F, which is the monthly building report, April 2020.
Move receipt for information.
Second.
Discussion. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thanks. I'm just wondering if staff can give us a quick rundown interpretation of, are things up or down, or how are they comparing to prior years?
I can speak to it, Mr. Mayor, through yourself. To Councillor O'Keefe, I would say that that in comparison to previous years, I would say we're significantly up. We look at a total year to date of almost 42 million. Last year to date, we were at 9 million. Last year ended up being a very strong year as well. Yeah, we're on pace for a very significant year. Probably, interestingly enough, on pace probably for one of the strongest years ever with respect to estimated construction value in comparison to what would have been the previous highest year. That would have been probably I would say it was either 2004, 2005 when the Pier Hotel was constructed.
And so just a follow-up, if I may. So is that due to projects that had been approved before and now things are just rolling in? Or does this also, you know, are we anticipating maybe a decline in the coming year based on less projects coming forward? Do you notice any trends there at all?
I can let perhaps Allison or Corey speak to sort of, I guess, where we are trending with respect to applications, but very much it's based on previously approved applications that are now going through the process or have gone through the process of approval and through the building permit approval process. So yeah, it's based on I would say the last a couple of years in terms of the level of development application activity and what's been approved. We have a couple of additional projects that aren't even included in this monthly tally that will show up either in the May or June report updates. But I might let Allison or Corey speak to sort of where we're trending in terms of the level of potential development activity for the future.
Ms. Verhagen?
Through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, I think Mr. Humble has summed it up well there, that the building permits that have recently been issued were for developments previously approved by council, multifamily developments and mixed-use downtown commercial. There are a couple still to come, and as was just mentioned, I understand a few building permits were recently issued that will show up in those May and June monthly building permit reports. There are 1 or 2 buildings left that have been approved by development permit, but the building permits have not yet been applied for or issued. So those will come as well. We are seeing fewer major development applications come in the last 6 months, but they are still in the works. People are thinking of things, and I think we can expect some to come forward at some point soon.
Thanks for that update.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. We'll now turn to item 14A, which is the item of correspondence. Councillor O'Toole want to provide an update with his liaison responsibility to Crest.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I will be brief. I recognize that Chair Logan of the Crest Board and General Manager Mr. Horth had attended council quite recently. We've just received the report as part of our package. You'll note that a priority for Crest has been most recently existing, that 16-year-old radio system that has now been moved to a digital radio technology format. Crest has over 2,900 radios in its system. In 2019, there were over 12.5 million transmissions on those radios. Interesting, is down slightly from the year before, and I think that related, as I recall, to a specific storm event where there was a tremendous amount of transmission traffic in a very condensed period. Crest is certainly a lean organization with only 7 full-time staff. And interestingly, I think it's a great example of a true partnership here within the capital region in that not only do municipalities, be they fire services, police services, RCMP, utilize the radio systems, but also a broad array of other partners. For example, the Canadian Forces, Military Police, Victoria Airport Authorities, Fire Service, UVic Security, BC Transit, etc. So it's a great example, I think, of a local success, and I wanted to provide those comments to council just to highlight the annual report we've received.
Thank you for the update, Councillor. A question to the Chief. Is the technology that was scheduled or planned for the CSB building operational at this time?
At this time, the bidirectional amplifier is not. It will be. Would have been probably installed by this time or close, but obviously as a result of current circumstances, it's been delayed. But our Crest P25 upgrade went quite smoothly here on the peninsula, and with vast majority of the cutover happened in November, and we've had very few or minor issues to date, so it's working very well for us.
Great, thanks for that update too. Okay, if we could have a motion to receive.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? The motion carries, thank you. And we do have the remaining items of correspondence for information.
Move receipt.
Second.
All those in favor? Motion carries. We do not have any notices of motion or motion to go in camera. I look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor? Motion passes. Thank you, Council, for the meeting this evening, and thank you to staff.